Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. I'm very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome to the first episode of the week of the DCEU Daily. Yes, it's Monday's edition of the DCEU Daily. The DCEU, let's start again. The DCEU, the franchise that survived its own beginning. That's amazing to me. That really is. I think Man of Steel and Batman v Superman are great films in their own right. I really do. But a lot of people don't agree with that. And really, this franchise should have imploded because of all the problems it had within it and the people working in it. And we discussed this yesterday, really, via the DCEU Extra and the DCEU Daily. We talked about how Warner Brothers didn't want Zack Snyder. They wanted Christopher Nolan to mould a universe, and he wasn't committed enough. And in the end, he brought Zack Snyder in. They didn't want Zack Snyder, but they got him. They got things. They brought someone in to do something for them, but he wasn't willing to do it, and he brought other people that they didn't want in it in this franchise. And I think that's the problem here. That's why it's not so easy and black and white to blame everything on Warner Brothers with what happened. But now we do have leadership. We do have Walter Hamada. We do have New Line Cinema, and they're doing a stellar job, as you will all see when you see the Joker movie. And we've already seen Shazam, and now Shazam has its European home video release. I've got my own copy on Prime Video. I'm very excited to rewatch that now. How awesome was that? It doesn't take long these days, does it, for films to reach home release, which is really exciting. But I think Shazam is evidence that we are headed for the right direction here. They took a franchise which is really divisive, and they took two films, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, and threw dozens of Easter eggs in this light movie, Shazam, this light family movie, Shazam. But this is what I want to talk about today. New Line Cinema and Walter Hamada out-Marvelized Marvel. In other words, they did the Marvel kind of concept, but in a better way. They found a way to be funny, to be light, but also to be dark at the same time. This film, as one of my nieces said, is very creepy, but the kids still like it. They still enjoy it. So you can have tone. You can have gravitas in a film. And Shazam has much gravitas in terms of the family, in terms of, what's his name? I forgot, Billy Baston. It's early morning here, but, Billy Baston doesn't want to hold hands. He doesn't want to do the whole let's thank for what we've got, right? He does it in the end of the film, and I find that very emotional because it really is a coming-of-age story for Billy Baston, and I think it really is more of an adaptation of the New 52 version of Billy and Shazam, and I think it's great, especially the relationship with Freddie Freeman, which is absolutely beautiful. Even the fact that we didn't see Superman's face in the final scene, and we just saw the S-Shield, it was still an awesome moment for Freddie to have Shazam and Superman walk in and support him. It was still a great moment that I think actually really worked. And this is why I feel that Hamada and New Line Cinema are really going to pull this off. They're going to take a franchise. I mean, remember Mark Hughes, that pundit who predicted doom and gloom for the DCEU after Justice League? I mean, I think everyone was doing so. But he was so sure, and he blocked me on Twitter because I basically didn't agree with him. I didn't agree with him politely, but these people love the sound of their own voice. Do you remember how the DCEU was going to be rebooted? I think how the DCEU is represented within Shazam actually proves there's no reboot here. There's not. Because if there was, we would have seen it. We would have heard it. And it's not there. Shazam, a New Line Cinema film, basically. Walter Hamada is very much involved, and they are actually showing us Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Easter eggs. They are quite cleverly going to move away from what was done originally, right? But still represent and say, Man of Steel and BVS in Justice League, a part of this franchise, and we're just going to move on now and do something a little bit different. I think that's extremely exciting. Also, what's extremely exciting, because the DCEU was accused of being too dark, we're now going to get the best of both worlds, aren't we? We're going to have the DC Black Label, who can go as dark as they want, but we can have the DCEU, who can sometimes be dark, but can also mix it up a bit. I think Shazam is a look at the future of the DCEU, where you'll have films with darkness, lightness, and a bit of comedy and fun. There'll be a mixture in these films, and I think this is what Shazam did really, really well, and that's why. And people say, why do you trust New Line Cinema? Why do you trust Walter Hamada? Because the evidence is there. Even before I saw Shazam, I'd seen what he'd done with New Line Cinema and those movies, especially the horror movies that him and James Wan were involved with. So there's no big secret in the bucket recipe here. It isn't like Coca-Cola, which we don't know how they make it. We know that New Line Cinema make films on a budget, but that doesn't mean the films have to be rubbish. They're not rubbish. It's just that the profit margin is bigger. Shazam's a prime example. Warner and New Line knew they weren't going to make a lot of money for this film because the character isn't recognisable enough within the mainstream cinema-going consumer. So they knew if they could make this film cheap enough, it could make a lot of money back, and it did. It made 4 times the budget, which is amazing, really. A lot of people kind of disappointed it didn't make $1 billion or $2 billion, which was never realistic for Shazam and its cast. The cast are predominantly a TV cast as well, which is pretty awesome. I think very few of the cast in that film would have cost them a lot of money. So this film is totally filmed in budget. Now, for the people saying that Shazam has rubbish CGI because of the low budget, that's absolute nonsense. The CGI is very good. The creatures look how they look because that's the way the director wanted them to look. They're very kind of Gremlins-y, if you like. So I like the special effects. I like the film. The film works, and let's be honest, this generation of filmgoers love Shazam. They enjoyed it. The kids love Shazam. You could take your kids to watch Shazam. And I think this is what Warner Brothers wanted with Justice League. And this is why they felt betrayed. I think they did feel betrayed about Justice League because they were promised by Chris Terrio, especially Chris Terrio, that Justice League would be the lighter one. And quite frankly, the first script that him and Zack put together certainly wasn't light. And the second script wasn't lighter. So I think when relationships break down, you have to look at all the partners and all the angles and say, do you know what? I think everyone here didn't behave in the right way. But as I said on the top of the show, when you've got someone like Christopher Nolan, who doesn't admit, you know what, I can't commit to this, I can't do this. Instead, he brings someone else in that the studio don't want. All the studio ever wanted was for Nolan to mould a great franchise, and he wasn't willing to do that. And this is what went wrong. But going forward, even the way Hamada saved Aquaman, as it was, I don't think Aquaman would have made over $1 billion. But I think Hamada was very clever. It was still quite a good, deep movie about the character, a character who feels he's not actually a hero, he's not worth something. But, James Wan, of course, would have made his movie. But there were elements that Snyder wanted to have in. Apparently, Batman was going to be in that movie as well. I don't think that would have spoilt the movie, but it would have ruined the feel of it being actually Aquaman's story. I think that's the problem with a lot of the MCU origin movies. They don't trust the actors or the characters, so they throw someone in. Unfortunately for them, there's no Robert Downey Jr. to save their films anymore. But isn't it funny? Because Spider-Man Far From Home is made over $1 billion now, and all they did in that movie was mention Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. I think that's one of the reasons the film did so well. It's amazing, really, but I think what Walter Hamada did with Aquaman was absolutely right. Make it about the characters. Focus on that movie. I think the DCEU will continue to be interconnected, but I think it won't be overly interconnected. I think we will get an MCU situation eventually when they're confident in what they're doing and they're more proficient and they can take more liberties with the films and the franchise. You'll probably have more crossovers. But I think until then, they really want to focus on the characters, build this up. You know, what they're doing now, like what they did with Aquaman, what they're going to do with Supergirl, what they're going to do with Plastic Man, etc., etc. And hopefully a Superman movie again, is create solo focused movies, right? And then worry about crossovers, worry about Justice League movies. That was part of the mistake. Batman v Superman came too early. They should have focused on all the solo movies, including a Batman solo movie. That was a mistake. And I'm sure if Christopher Nolan was actually running the thing, that's what he would have done too. But he didn't have the time. His mind was on other projects, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't accept the task of moulding a DCEU franchise if you're not committed, if you're not motivated, if you don't have the time. And this is why I put a lot of the problems with the early DCEU and the divisiveness on his shoulders. And I'm kind of fed up. Will Rowland's the actor, and John Aaron Garza are still going at it on Twitter, and I've put my two penny worth in actually, and just said, do you know what? I don't really care if Affleck and Snyder weren't talking in the end. It's irrelevant and immaterial to me. I'm sick to death of the WB bashing. I'm sick to death of the Jeff Johns bashing. It's fucking boring. Jeff Johns was brought in to do a job, and his hands were tied. He couldn't do anything because of a studio having someone they didn't want there. They couldn't agree to disagree. They couldn't come to a compromise. Zack wasn't willing to compromise. He already said that as much on Vero. Never compromise, right? But the problem is, you do have to compromise with your bosses sometimes. So, in the end of the day, it was the wrong fit, and Nolan made the mistake. But then, if I say to you, oh, Nolan shouldn't have brought in Snyder, then we would never have got the Fabulous Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And I'm absolutely happy about that. And one day I hope I'll fight to see the Snyder Cut absolutely work. So what do you think, everyone? Are you excited about the future of that Walter Hamada is creating for DC Films with the Black Label and the DCEU? Are you happy the franchise is not getting rebooted? And how do you think we're doing in the fight to get the Snyder Cut released? Are arguments between Will Rowland and John Aaron Garza setting us back? Also, I think when I hear people demanding the sacking of Toby Emmerich, right, and blaming him for the Justice League scenario, I don't like to hear people demanding for people to lose their jobs. Toby Emmerich, as far as I know, has never killed anyone. He hasn't really done anything bad. If you see him as partly to blame for what happened, the interference, but as I've said before, the interference was happening for a reason, because when you don't trust the people that are working for you, you have a problem. And as a superior, people have to compromise with you. And if there's no compromise in these situations, things go to shit. So thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow in tomorrow's edition of the DCEU Daily.